But I had what I called my church lady loop going in my head, going, wow, you must not be a real Christian. Wow, you must not actually love God. Well, you're really sinful. Well, you're diving into the devil's tools and tactics and allowing space for demons to come into your life. And at the same time, I was experiencing myself in a way that I never had before. I was reading things about myself that were so true and so
Mm.
on point, and that were releasing me to be the amazing human that I was born to be.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Let's Heal with Beth Jones. That's me, your host. My mission is to bring the power of healing to trauma and abuse survivors. That's why every guest on this show will bring you an amazing story of healing in action. So come on, everyone, let's heal. Welcome to Let's Heal. I'm Beth, your healing mentor. We often think that science and spirituality, or corporate careers and cosmic intuition, have to exist in separate boxes. But what happens when the only way to find your true self is to burn those boxes down? Today, I'm sitting down with Kelly Irene, the founder of Most True You. Kelly walks a fascinating line. She's a high-level HR director in the corporate world, but she's also a gifted astrologer. Her journey is profound. She went from being a conservative pastor's wife, living a life that wasn't hers, to losing everything in divorce, only to find her soul's blueprint in the stars. If you've ever felt like you're playing a role instead of living your life, this episode is going to give you the permission you need to find the unique design God has for you. Get ready to discover your most true you. Kelly Irene, welcome to this episode of Let's Heal with Beth Jones. How are you today?
I am so good. Thanks for having me.
I am delighted to have you on the show. This is going to be a super fun
Yeah.
conversation because we are going to talk about one of my favorite subjects, and that is astrology.
Yay. That's one of
Yeah.
my favorites too. I'm so passionate about it now.
Yes. And I know it's part of the work that you do, your company called Most True You, which, if you really understand astrology and what it tells us about ourselves, it tells us about our most true self. So it's really great work that you do. And I think the name of your company, Most True You, is on point
Thank you.
for the reality of what astrology can do for us to learn about who we truly are.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's wonderful. So I'm delighted to have you. It'll be a fun conversation.
Yeah.
The show is called Let's Heal because most of my guests that come on here have had some sort of a healing journey that they have taken throughout their life. And we're going to talk about that journey for you and how it led you to where you are today, the work that you're doing, and all the self-discoveries that you've had along the way. But let's just take a moment to give you an opportunity to tell the audience whatever it is that you would like to tell them about what caused you to need to heal.
Yeah, I love the framing of that question because it is the healing comes after a wound. And
Mm,
for me, that woundedness started, I think, as it does for most of us, at a really early age. I grew up in the church. I grew up in North America in an evangelical, so Protestant church, and really had this teaching early on that our hearts are sinful and cannot be trusted, that at our core, we cannot trust ourselves. And without realizing how damaging that had been, I went through the vast majority of my life as if that were true, as if I could not trust myself. And what that ended up looking is I always go back to this memory that I have. I was early in my career, so mid 20s, had just got married, had just moved to Louisville, Kentucky, just got my first like professional job. I'm in a big building in the middle of downtown Louisville. I'm standing in the bathroom. I have on this gorgeous suit that I had just bought. It's like navy blue and cream colored and a satin ruffle top and high heels. And I'm looking in the mirror as this mid 20 something going, that woman is so professional, so put together, so, just everything I want to be. And I have no idea who she is. I'm looking at myself just going, I don't know that woman in the mirror. And what I did with that is I started looking at, okay, how do other people show up in their jobs? And at that time, I was an executive assistant. So, how do other people show up as an executive assistant? And I tried to show up like they did. I became a mom about a year later, and same thing. How are other women showing up as a mom? Because I don't feel like I know how to be a mom. And I would try to be a mom like I saw other people doing it. Because again, I couldn't be trusted. I didn't have the capacity for good in me, was the truth I was carrying around. I was married to a man who became a pastor. And so I'm looking around going, gosh, these pastors' wives look a lot different from me. They're doing life a lot different from me. They're more like in traditional roles. That doesn't feel good to me. But again, I can't trust myself. And so I would try to be a pastor's wife the way that other women were being a pastor's wife. And so I spent really a decade of my adult life building what looked like an incredibly beautiful life. Two girls, married, husband's a pastor. We're doing all this very spiritual work, beautiful house. And in that, there was zero room for me. I had built myself out of my life. And that ended up crumbling. We got divorced. I came to a point where I realized there was no room for me and there couldn't be any room for me in that life. We got divorced. Through that, I ended up, and I didn't expect it. I lost my community. I lost my identity. Everything was stripped away from me at that point in my
Mhm.
life. And the best way that I could describe it at that time, because I was talking to my therapist about this back when this was happening, is when we lived in Louisville, we would get tornado sirens would come and we'd have to go down into our basement. And thankfully, we always came back to a house. But I remember one of my friends describing what it was like, where 10 minutes prior, he had walked down into his basement with his family and the tornado had passed over. They came back up, and where their house once stood, it was all rubble. And that's how my life felt. It just felt like complete rubble, like where there had once been a home, where there had once been memories, where there had once been structure, identity, all of this, it was gone, completely wiped out. And so that's what brought me to the point of needing to heal, was essentially losing everything I had built for a decade.
What's interesting about that is we have very similar stories, although I was a little older when it happened to me than when it happened to you, but coming to that point where I literally woke up one day, woke up from a hypnotherapy session and realized because of what I discovered in that session that I had no idea who I really was.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you talk about looking at yourself in the mirror as the professional and not knowing who that person was.
Mhm.
I had similar experiences to that where I would describe it as almost an out of body experience. And so it was like this me could look over at the professional who I was and just wonder who is that person. And that's what it felt like to me, was an out of body
Yeah.
experience. There was a being that was me.
Yep.
It was 100% full on me that people saw, they engaged with, they built some sort of a relationship with. I was there and present, but I wasn't there and present. It was like a
Mm.
different being inside of me. It's the weirdest thing, and that's the best way
Yep.
that I can describe it, as like an out of body experience when I
Yeah.
went to focus on her and say, who is she?
Yeah.
And so I identify so well with what you're describing about both that experience and then waking up one day and everything is just gone.
Yeah.
Everything that you knew about yourself has been shattered.
Yeah.
And there's then the work that we do to figure out, okay, who am I?
Yeah.
That's what the next step is, hopefully,
Yeah.
when you get to that place. That is, if you're listening to this, you're watching this, and you find yourself in that place. Hopefully, what you're going to do right now is start doing the work to find yourself, because
Yeah.
that's what we have to do. So tell us how that started for you,
Yeah.
getting on the pathway to finding yourself, and then what does that look like?
Yeah. So it's interesting because I think some of us are able to be in that moment and go, what I need is to find who I am. For me, in that moment of looking at my life and saying it's nothing but rubble, it took me about 2.5 years to get to the next step because I went into survival mode, right?
Yes.
Newly divorced, newly
Yes.
no community, ended up moving, couldn't even pay my own rent. Going from I have this gorgeous, beautiful house to my mom is helping me to pay my rent. And thank goodness I had my mom to help me with that. And so I
Hmm.
was in survival mode, taking care of two young daughters, single mom, trying to make sure I could pay the bills, dating a little bit here or there, just survival mode. I describe it as my soul went into hibernation. I'd walk around my apartment complex and I'd see people in their apartments with what looked like friends and just felt this intense ache because I didn't have that at that time. And I didn't know how to have that at that time. And it was just 2.5 years of loneliness, of heartache, of survival mode and being in hibernation. And
Hmm.
then what ended up shifting those gears for me, I knew that I needed something different. I knew I was not happy. I knew I didn't want to be in survival mode. I had got to a point with my career where I was paying my own bills. So no longer am I in survival mode. I can start to think of other things besides that. And I saw a advertisement for a new moon circle at a local spa. No
Hmm.
clue what that was. I just knew at this point something needed to give because my soul was so just impacted by not being able to breathe, by being in that hibernation spot. And so I went to this new moon circle and it was like a 4 hour thing. And we did a couple of things. One of them was vision boarding. Just what do you want your life to look like? And so it opened my eyes to there's something else beyond where I'm at now,
Hmm.
giving me just a little bit of vision. And then we talked about the moon cycles. We talked about setting intentions at the new moon and watching those grow at the full moon and what those cycles mean. And then we pulled oracle cards. I did not have a clue what oracle cards were, but in even that small action, there was a little truth spoken to my heart, who I
Hmm.
am. And that was February of 2020. 3 weeks later, the entire world shut down for
Yeah.
COVID. And so I had this new kind of curiosity going, oh, there's something here about the moon. There's something here with these cards. There's something here with kind of rekindling my journaling and visioning. And I just dove headfirst in with learning about astrology. That's where I started to learn about our birth chart, about that being a snapshot of the energies that were at play the moment we're born. Started learning about oracle cards as a way to tap into my true self and my intuition. We can go farther down what that ended up looking, but for me, that was the point where I turned the corner
Yeah.
toward
Yeah,
healing.
I like where you started this part of our conversation with the reality that there is a period of just being in survival mode
Yeah.
when that pivot happens. And I think of that pivot point as being, for lack of a better phrase, you hear people refer to it as the rock bottom moment.
Yep.
And to me,
Yeah.
that is, I refer to it more as a pivot point, a little bit more positively than
Yeah.
being at the bottom. But it's the same thing, right? It's that point in time when really the person who we used to be ceases to exist.
Yeah.
And the new person who we've always been, but has been covered up with whatever trauma and abuse and survival and stuffed
Yeah.
emotions, all of that that we're carrying inside of us, it's time to shed all of that. And that's the pivot point, the moment when that person is going to go away if we do the
Mm.
work to
Yeah.
heal, if we take the
Yeah.
journey to move forward in a way that helps to reveal to us and to the world who we truly are. And so I love the fact that you talked about that period of survival because I experienced that as well. Mine was a little bit shorter period of time than yours was, and I think it's just because of being at different places
Yeah.
in our lives. You were younger with different priorities and things,
Yeah.
responsibilities in your life. I was older and I didn't have those same, I had responsibilities, but they were different. And so my survival period was a little bit shorter. I think it's also my journey, right? It's the path that God had me on was to move very quickly from
Yeah.
that pivot point, I'm all the way down to putting me on the path to be able to recover and find myself, right? But I did have that, I know what you're talking about, that period of survival of like literally every day waking up and going, what am I going to do? How am I going to get through this? How am I going to
Yeah.
survive this? But we do figure it out and it's great. I think that would be my next piece of advice for guests who are watching this or listening to this is that if you're in that survival mode, the biggest thing for me was reaching out to people who I believed could help me, which is the
Yes.
same thing you did with
Yeah.
your mom. And I had two friends who at the time we weren't as deeply connected as we became and are
Mm.
now, but they were in my life and I just felt like that was the place to start. And that's part of my story, part of my journey, what I call my universe touches, where God comes down and touches me from time to time. And I know I'm exactly
Mm.
where I'm meant to be in that moment. And my experience telling those two women was one of the times I experienced that. It was actually the first time that I experienced that or knew that it was happening to me, where
Yeah.
God was making sure that I was in the right place on my path.
Mm.
But getting out of that survival mode, we really do have to ask for help
Yes.
and find people who can give us that help in whatever need we get it. So that is definitely a bit of advice that's coming through here. If you're in that place,
Yeah.
reach out for help. There is someone out there who will help you, and you need to
Yes.
connect with that to move past the survival
Yeah.
mode. The healing journey takes so many different forms, the tools that we use. And I talk a lot about that in my messaging and in this show, we talk about a lot of different tools, and you've talked about a few of them. I do want to focus. So you've mentioned astrology, getting introduced to it through the new
Hmm.
moon cycles, your birth chart. And then you also mentioned oracle cards and that first entrance into where your world was going to go in terms of the work that you do.
Yeah.
Let's just touch on oracle cards first, and then we'll come back to the astrology aspects because I want to focus more on that and what we're going to talk about. And it's what you do.
Yeah.
The oracle cards, or it's interesting to me, that's the word that's there now because they've been called tarot cards for a long time. And
Hmm.
I don't know if there's some sort of mysticism or maybe even a bit of a negative connotation attached to tarot cards that we call them oracle cards now. I love that phrase, oracle card, because for me, those types of messaging, it's God talking to me. And that's what I
Yes.
believe about them. And it goes
Yeah.
back to what you mentioned about intention. Right? And so if my intention is to receive God speaking to me, God created it all. So God can talk to me in any way that God wants to talk to me. And
Yeah.
that's how I view the oracle cards or the tarot cards, whatever you want to refer to them, right? So I believe that if I'm in a space where somebody is going to give me a reading or I'm doing my own reading, whatever the message that is intended for me in that moment in time is the message that's going to come true. And that's my intention, is to receive that. And so I actually think it's a very powerful way that God speaks to us. So I'm glad you mentioned that. So just tell me your thoughts about that and how you use it.
Mm. So oracle cards they're a spin-off of tarot. Tarot is a very set system where you have always the same number of cards. They follow the same framework. They can have different imagery, but it's always going to follow the same structure and framework from one
Mm,
tarot deck to another. Oracle cards are used similar to tarot, but they can have any number of cards, any structure, any set of messages. It's a broader category
mm,
than tarot, but they're used very similarly. And the way
mm.
that I like to think of them is they're a conduit, right? We
Yeah.
are energetic beings and they're a conduit for energy, whether that's messages from God, messages from spirit, messages. Some of us have guides that we work with. We can receive messages from our guides. We can receive messages from our true self through the cards because we're so used to operating like I did, trying to operate as somebody else. And that was how I first started using them, was just getting to know, who am I? Who am I meant to be? Why am I here? What is my purpose? And I would pull cards and ask questions like that and just journal what came through the
Mm,
cards. And now I teach a class now called You Are the Oracle that's all about using the cards to tap in first to your own intuition
mm,
and to whatever intention people choose to set to tap into messages from God or spirit, to tap into messages from their guides, whatever that happens to
Mhm.
be. But it's really they serve as a conduit, and because there's so many different types of them, there's all kinds of different messages you can get from them. So yesterday morning, I pulled one that said, pay attention to the monkey mind, something like that. And the whole message behind it, because I had a whole lot going on yesterday and I was in doubt of myself and my ability to do what I knew I needed to do yesterday. And so I'm shuffling the cards. Can you just give me a card to help me get through today and get it through, show up as my true self? And I pull this card, and it's essentially the message of it is every time you have a creative thought, you get your spark going, you know what you're supposed to do. This like monkey mind comes in and says, you're not good enough. You can't do this. You don't have the capacity. And in that, you need to choose which are you going to listen to, your intuition or this other monkey mind.
Hey, empowered survivor, are you ready to transform your deepest wounds into your greatest strengths? I've created something special for you, my free Healing Quick Start Guide, because you too can heal, and I want to show you how. Inside, you'll discover where you are on the emotional scale, assess your readiness to do the deep inner healing work, and get clear on your next steps to turning your pain into power. If you're ready to become who you were always meant to be before your trauma and survival taught you to be small, download your free guide at empoweredsurvivors.com/heal. So first of all, thank you for explaining tarot versus oracle. To me, they're just in a messaging category. Yes. That's how I think about them. I don't get into the mechanics of how they work and all, because it's just God talking to me is what I believe about it. But so thank you for clarifying that. Now I know the difference. So I learned something. Thank you. That's fantastic. So I pull oracle cards too. So that's what I use myself for the same reason, to get the messaging that's there, as I mentioned, that's coming through to me. But I also have other ways that it comes in. So I have the CoStar app on my phone, which sometimes when I'm actually in the app, I'm like, okay, you're actually on point today. And other times I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So I'm not really sure whether or not I'm fully dialed in. But one of the things that I do notice about it is I will get the notifications on my phone, the daily messaging, and I would say 95% of the time that I actually see the message pop up and I read it, it's on point. Now, there are plenty of times when the message is going on and there's a notification and I'm not seeing it, but when I'm actually engaged, I equate that like to angel numbers. The awareness of angel numbers, you actually have to see them to be able to then take the message that comes with angel numbers. And that's how I think CoStar, that the notifications are working on my phone. Oh, you're here, you really need this message today. And then there it is. I see it. So I just all kind of ways that those things come to us. Yeah. So it's interesting how that works though, right? For you yesterday, the message that was so perfectly on point for what you needed to hear to do what you needed to do. I had a similar thing happen to me yesterday around being bolder with what I'm doing and not being afraid to be bolder. And it's funny because that coincides with me being wiped off of Facebook and Instagram yesterday, completely disabled. I'm completely gone and probably never going to be back on either of those platforms again. But it's had me in this space now of not reacting, but how do I use that and what's the opportunity? And all of that is leading me to places where I can be bigger and bolder with what I'm going to be doing with my own progression of growing my business and my platform and all of that. So it's just interesting how those things work for us. One question that popped into my mind, you have an interesting background coming from the religious space that you came from, and being a pastor's wife even. And I'm assuming it was a pastor, it was a Christian faith. So engaging in that way with people. Just talk for a little bit about your experience going from that place. And in fact, arguably, some would say that there are verses in the Bible that tell you that astrology is sinful.
Sure.
I just like to talk about that for a little bit, because I've had people who have pushed back on me for the same reason, because I'm very open about my belief and what I understand about myself and my life based on my natal chart and then what's happening with the
Yeah.
energies at any given moment in our universe and how that's impacting me. So I've actually had people tell me that I was not a believer and I was sinful and I was
Hmm.
just like I'm worshiping something that I shouldn't be
Yeah.
worshiping. I have my views on it, obviously, but I'm interested in your journey with that whole notion and how you've bridged that and crossed it and what you tell people and how you feel about where you came from and where you are today.
Yeah, backing up to me being somewhere around 9. Okay, so I was a young child in my little town, standing at the bookstore with my mom, and across the street, there's a shop with their windows painted, and in the on the window, it says things like astrology. And I don't remember all the other words. I just remember
Mhm.
seeing the word astrology. And I'm someone who, growing up, I'd go out with my dad on the boat to go duck hunting. I grew up in a really rural area, and he would point out the different constellations. So I knew of the stars, I knew of astrology, but I remember seeing that and thinking, I want to go in there and explore. And my immediate next thought was, I'm a Christian, I can't. And so and I don't remember ever being taught that specifically, but obviously I was because
Mm,
I knew at that age, as a Christian, I should not step foot in that store. That going over that threshold it was equated to going into something evil or demonic or sinful. Going through into my adult life, I carried that with me. I was part of multiple different congregations of churches, multiple different, oh, I'm blanking on the word, but anyway, multiple different types of, right, Southern Baptist, ECC. If you're in that world, those will make a difference. If not, it doesn't matter. But there are different types of churches, different subsets of how they interpret the Bible. One commonality amongst all of them was witchcraft is evil, and we are including astrology in witchcraft. And I think that's where the bulk of that understanding comes from is we don't worship other gods. We don't worship the stars. We don't allow for witchcraft. And we have, as a whole within Christianity, interpreted some of those verses from the Old Testament to be anything that has to do with astrology, with tarot, with even I've heard people say this about yoga. I've heard people say this about meditation. It becomes a umbrella verse or an umbrella doctrine for anything that specific people within the church aren't comfortable
mm,
with.
mm.
And so that's where I like to start with that is we have interpreted verses to mean that astrology or meditation or yoga or other things are evil. For me, at that point, when I went to that new moon circle, I didn't know that I wasn't totally equating it with witchcraft or astrology, but as I started diving into it, I had what I called my church lady loop going in my head, going, wow, you must not be a real Christian. Wow, you must not actually love God. Well, you're really sinful. Well, you're diving into the devil's tools and tactics and allowing space for demons to come into your life. And at the same time, I was experiencing myself in a way that I never had before. I
Mm,
was reading things about myself that were so true and so
mm,
on point, and that were releasing me to be the amazing human that I was born to be. And so I had to come to terms with I have heard my entire life that this is evil and that it is sinful to engage with these different resources. And as I'm getting curious, as I'm opening myself up to these, I am finding nothing but good in
yeah.
this. It is expanding my faith. It is reconnecting me with my faith that had completely been shattered given what I had gone through. And so I then started going back to what are the fruits of the spirit? What am I seeing in this? Is it good fruit? Is it bad fruit? What's the fruit of that kind of an interpretation? Not great, honestly. The
Yeah.
fruit of exploring the stars that were, if we believe the Bible, created by God. The fruit of that has been pretty darn great
Yeah, that's what
in
I
a
think
lot
is
of
the irony
ways.
of this whole conversation is
Yeah,
God created it all and God can
right.
do whatever
And
God
we're
wants.
not worshiping the stars, right?
No,
We're
it's just
using them as a
information.
mean of
Yeah.
as a means of understanding who we've been
Yeah.
created to be.
Yeah, it's information. That's how I
Yeah.
look at it.
Yeah.
It's information
Yeah.
very specific to me. And the Bible
Yeah.
tells me that God knows every hair on my head and everything about my life. My story is
Yeah.
written, and I believe that 100%. Why isn't it written in the stars? Why can't
Yeah.
it be written in my birth chart?
Yeah. Why not?
Why not? That makes
And
total
every
sense to me.
time I read a chart with somebody, every single time I hear some form of, oh, that makes so much
Yes.
sense.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, because I'm literally born to be the healing mentor. And in my chart, written in my chart, my story, and of course, as it's not one of the things I think people misunderstand is it's not like fortune telling, right? Or
Right.
telling you what's about to happen in your life. It's not that. And there's a lot of interpretation that goes into the chart. And
Yeah.
one of the reasons why I've been successful using astrology for information in my life is because I've spent almost 10 years building a relationship with the woman who I work
Hmm.
with. Right? And so there is a me helping her to say X, Y, and Z, and this
Yeah.
house could mean these 8 things, and we can figure it out together through dialogue what it means
Yep.
on my life. And that's gotten narrower and narrower to where we can do it much more quickly and easier now to understand it. But that has only happened because I've actually been working at it
Yeah.
and really trying to understand it for myself. And
Yeah.
part of my healing journey in the last 5.5 years in particular has been this awakening and this aha to now I understand why these things are happening in my life because I was
Yeah.
literally born to spend 50 years in suffering and pain. And then to have this amazing pivotal event that I had, go on my healing journey. And now the rest of my life is about spreading my broad message, you too can heal, to tell everyone that.
Yeah.
And that is written in my birth chart. Now, there's an element of not being able to piece that together fully until I had walked the journey and
Yeah.
I'm in the journey. But now astrology, my natal chart in particular, can help, my birth chart can help to identify what was in my life's path,
Yeah.
what I was going to be
Yeah.
doing. It also helps me to understand the skills, like my qualities, my character,
Yes.
my strengths, my weaknesses. It helps me
Yes.
to understand these things that also shape the path and on what I'm doing with my life. But
Yeah.
I think the religious, and I haven't spent enough time with people of other religions to know how they feel about astrology. Some of them I could probably guess how they would feel about it, but I think it's anything in our life. It can be taken to extremes and it
Hmm.
can be manipulated to serve
Yeah.
particular purposes.
Yes.
And I really ground myself on the two things that we've been talking about here that I think are key to me and why I know there's truth in it. And first is because God created it and God can do whatever he wants with the stars.
Yeah.
And the very familiar feeling of hearing people talk to me about my chart and about what's happening to me currently. And there's a peace in that. There's an inner knowing. There are some epiphany. Oh, now I get it, right? Oh, of course, now I understand. There are those moments, but it's much more, I feel much more settled by what I'm hearing. And even when my astrologer says it could be bumpy for a little bit, I'm
Yeah.
ready for that. And I
Yep.
understand that I'm just going through a rough time. And that helps me to be able to navigate through it because I know it's not going to be forever. It's
Yeah.
going to end. And it just
Yeah.
helps me to understand that. So, yeah.
To that point, I think that's so helpful because I did about 2 months ago, I did a kind of year ahead look for one of my clients. And what we saw in her chart was the bulk of the year is probably going to feel very challenging.
Mhm.
I don't use it to go, this is exactly what's going to happen at exactly this time, but here's the energies that are going to be at play. Okay, so if you know it's going to be challenging, you're not going into it as a victim, you're going into it as how can I work with the challenging energies? And that's what we
Mhm.
focused on is if you've got these challenges, one, we see themes of rest and retreat throughout your chart. So create times to rest and retreat all year versus the way that we normally do things where we go push, push, push. and then rest and retreat. That's not the time for her this year. It
Mm,
needs to be a lot of rest and retreat. And what we're already seeing playing out is really practical reasons why she needed that message
mm,
ahead of time. And then
yes.
there's other times where we look at it and it's, hey, actually, like you're saying, there's a little bumpy period ahead. It's just turbulence. It's going to be fine. You're going to go beyond that and you're going to just let it be what it is for the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's empowering to
So
have
empowering.
that
Yeah.
information because particularly when the planets are stirring things up for us and
Yeah.
making it a bit more challenging or turbulent, bumpy, we can have the tendency to, I mean, we can go the direction of the victim and give
Yeah.
into it, right? And
Yeah.
just play it up and make it much bigger than it
Yeah.
has to be. Or we can work on what are some of the things that we can do to help mitigate that, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes it might mean that what our human, right, as beings, thinking beings, what we want to do, our will might not be in alignment with what's meant for us, what's intended for us. And another
Yeah.
way to say that, it might not be in alignment with God's path for us and what God wants us to be doing. And so
Yeah.
that's helped me out a lot. Even things like the day that I launched my book, I was very intentional about that and making sure that energetically it was a good day for me around the
Yeah.
time that I wanted to launch because I didn't need the heavier energies of the universe pushing against me as I'm getting my message out into the world.
Yeah.
It's, I think about building strategies to deal with that and really also about being aligned to what God's intention is for you.
Yeah.
It's information. I think it's super powerful and very direct information that so many people are scared of. And I think it's because of the reasons that you've said. For whatever
Yeah.
reason, we come into this world. And I don't, when you said that about you were taught that at some point in time, I don't ever remember being taught that, but for whatever reason, I had it in my mind for a long time that astrology was taboo. And I don't really
Hmm.
know where that came from. Right?
Yeah.
And I've had the opportunity to open my mind and have my own journey spiritually. And that's been a big part of it, right? In my
Yeah.
own developing my own understanding of who God is. And frankly, one of the things I've been working on this year is a more direct connection to God and my spirit guides, right? Where I don't
Mm.
have to have interpreters and the intuitives that we connect with that help us to
Yeah.
have those spiritual messaging. But I want less of that. I want more of my own direct connection. And I realize that doing the astrology work and even the oracle cards that we were talking
Mhm.
about previously, that's all part of that direct spiritual connection that I'm
Yeah.
after, where I am receiving, I'm open to receiving, and I'm allowing God to speak to me and guide me, more importantly, lead me on my
Mm.
path
Yeah.
based on God's will, right? And what God
Yeah.
wants in my life and what God wants me to be doing. But I have to be open to that. And I just feel like we have grown up, so many people have grown up in a space where all of those beautiful open sources have been shut down. And it's too bad that it's that way. I think it's super cool that you've had both sides of that journey and have the ability to share that. And I hope you'll share that with more and more
Yeah.
people because I think it's super important in this day and time that what are referred to as alternative or new age
Yeah.
or bad in some cases, it's just sinful,
Yeah.
taboo, demonic, all those other awful labels that get attached to them, that we can just
Yes.
dispel those myths or let people know
Yeah.
that it's
Yeah.
just information and God's talking to you.
It's just
So receive it.
information. It's neutral. And I think it's important to point out that there are places, even in the Bible, where astrology is used for good. How did the Magi find Jesus as a baby? They followed a star.
It's a great point. Yes.
And nowhere does anyone reprimand them for following a star
So true.
in
So
that
true.
story, right?
Yeah.
Nowhere in there are they reprimanded for that.
I'm glad you said that because now I have that, which I can use whenever someone says to me, because I've literally had people reject me engaging with them. I had somebody who would not bring me on her podcast
Yeah,
because if you go to my website, I talk about astrology. I talk about myself being double Scorpio, Scorpio rising. I talk about what that
yeah,
means. And she was like, yeah, no, it can't be on my podcast. That
Yeah.
is in direct opposition of what the Bible tells us is appropriate. I was like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
that's cool. So now I have that story.
Yeah.
I can use that. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit more about the journey toward astrology and the work that you do now, because we've said this a few times now, there's truth in it. And so you've experienced that obviously for yourself, but there was a path that you
Hmm.
went through to really do the discovery work
Yeah.
around that. And that path for you has led to the work that you do now. So share that with
Yeah.
us.
Yeah. So as I was diving into oracle cards, into the moon circles, then I learned about our birth chart. And what the way that it was introduced to me that I love is your birth chart is a map of where the planets were, the planets, the sun, the moon, and the horizon, where they were the moment that you were born. So when we're talking about a birth chart, neutrally, that's what it is. It's simply a map. Where were they in the sky? Which of the zodiac signs were they associated with? And within that, we begin to see things like what is our purpose, our sun? How are we meant to shine in the world? We see things like what is our core needs? What do I need and what do you need to feel safe, to feel satisfied, to feel successful? What do we need to connect with others? That's our moon sign. It's that internal set of needs that we have. We see things like, what's our unique lens that we view the world through? You have a different filter than I have. You being a Scorpio rising are going to have a different filter than me being a Libra rising. And where we see that is where was the horizon, the eastern horizon when you were born? That's where the sun rises. That's where the moon rises, right? Everything comes over the eastern horizon in our view. So that's why we talk about it as our lens or our filter that we see the world through. But that also tells us what our unique gifts are. Right? The energy of Scorpio is intuitive. It asks really good, focused questions. It is not afraid of the depths. That energy is not afraid of the darkness. It's transformative. So
Mm.
you have this lens where you're going into the world, into new situations, new contexts, new relationships, going, I have an innate BS filter. So you know immediately when somebody is not being truthful, when they're not being authentic in a way that most other people don't. Just by nature of having two strong placements in Scorpio. I know that I'm like getting into a little bit of the teaching on this, but this is what I was learning about myself
Mhm.
even as I was going through this was I was learning, okay, my sun sign, my purpose, how I'm meant to shine is in Aquarius. Aquarius is a tradition breaker. It is, and it does so not for the sake of being a jerk, but for the sake of the community, for the sake
Mm.
of the downcast, the outcast, the misfit. It's looking at the people that society leaves behind and goes, let's bust all the systems, all the traditions that are leaving those people behind.
Okay, can we just pause there for a
Yes.
moment? Because that is what we call the proverbial mic drop moment. Because did you hear the earlier part of the conversation when we talked about your journey, right? The tradition that you have,
Yep.
that you've busted, you've bucked, right? That's actually what
Yeah.
you've done in your life, which
Yeah.
gives me cold chills. So
Mm.
your chart tells
Yes.
you that, and you're like, oh, of course that's why that's happened to me. Of course,
Yeah.
because I was always
Yeah.
meant to do that. That's
Right.
amazing.
So trying to show up as a
Yeah,
pastor's wife, the way that women have
yeah,
traditionally shown up as
yeah.
a pastor's wife was in direct opposition to my purpose and how I'm meant to
Yes.
shine. So no
Yes.
wonder I felt like there was something wrong with me in
Yes.
that.
But you to fulfill your purpose, you had to go through that space
Hmm.
and time where you were in the tradition
Yes.
to then, which is
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. And
fantastic.
I
That's
didn't
so
leave
great.
that for the fun of it. Right.
Yeah.
I talk about losing my church community came as an utter shock to me. Looking
Of
back,
course.
I can go, oh no, duh, that happened. In the moment, I did not expect that. I thought
Hmm.
I would be staying within the tradition,
Hmm.
within the community, that people would understand what was happening and why. And that did not happen. But to your point, I needed that. I needed to lose the fake identity I had built. I needed to lose the community that had been built around someone who I am not in order to find my true self.
Yes.
Yeah. And then
Yes.
looking at, okay, so going into my moon sign, what are my core needs? I have a Capricorn moon. Capricorn is this like peak of the mountain energy. You only get there by setting the intention, by setting the big goal, by loving the challenge and going step by step to get there. My needs are I have to set big goals and meet those. So again, being the traditional Christian, conservative Christian wife and mother meant you stay home, you take care of the kids, you be happy supporting my life. That's what, and I'm not saying that was what my husband at the time made me do. That was what I felt was my calling.
Yeah.
There was no challenge in that. For me, there was no challenge in that. There was no getting to set big goals. There was no getting, my needs weren't met. And so it wasn't a matter of, as I thought at the time, I'm just not grateful enough. Let me keep doing my gratitude journals so that I will be more content and more happy with staying home and taking care of the kids. It was no, that's a worthy and wonderful thing to do. And I needed something big. I love challenges. I need them. I seek them out. That's just who I am. And so I didn't have that core need of mine being met. That rising sign, that how do we look at life? For me, with it being Libra, I go in and I go, where there's chaos, how can I bring harmony?
Mm.
That's one of my first questions. Or I'm where you will have a really strong authenticity radar. My radar is where's the conflict? Where's someone
Mm.
at conflict with themselves, with
Mm.
others, with me? Where is the emotional turmoil happening? I have a really strong radar for that. And so
Mm.
that is a gift that I bring. It can also be all these energies have shadow sides. They're a
Yes.
continuum, a spectrum. And so the shadow side of that Libra energy is it is hard for me to hold boundaries. It's hard for me to say what I want because I'm so conflict avoidant if I go into that shadow side. And knowing about my journey, right, that's what I did. I figured out what everybody else wanted from me, and I made that thing happen
Yeah.
at the cost of my own self. Libra is very justice oriented. There's a lot of other things with it, but that's as I started learning these things about myself, it was that, oh, okay, that's why this didn't work. That's why I couldn't be content. That's why I went into the same unhelpful patterns over and over again.
Yeah.
And then that began to fuel that growth where I got the language to describe who I'm meant to be. I look at it as like a cosmic compass to help us know our
Hmm.
path.
Yeah. I love that. Cosmic compass is exactly
Yeah.
what it is.
That's
Yeah,
actually my
exactly.
LLC's name. So my like overarching is
Is it?
Cosmic Compass LLC. And
Oh,
then
I love that.
my
Yeah.
there's all business reasons for different things. But that was what that growth looked like for me on a really practical level was it was just diving in and going, okay, what does it mean to have my sun in Aquarius? What does it mean to have my moon in Capricorn? Just starting with the basics. And then there's so many other layers and levels of nuance
Yes.
to be had, but it was in that foundational sun, moon, and rising. And that's where I start everybody when I talk with them.
For
Sun, moon, and
everyone,
rising.
that
Gotta know
foundation
that.
is key for everyone. So
Yeah.
I tell people if you go to I actually did a podcast episode about this not too long ago. I don't know, maybe it came out. This is the 30th episode, which came out probably a little over a month ago. But I talk about a reading that I had in March of 2024 and how it then played out over the next 15 or
Mm.
16 months until earlier this year. And that's one of the things that I talk about in the opening about astrology is if you're one of those people who goes and reads the Sunday morning horoscope and you're like, I don't have any idea what this means, and you throw it
Yeah.
out, when you're just at the basic level, right, you're missing two-thirds of the key information that you need for it
Yes.
to make any sense to you. Of course it doesn't resonate at all with most of
Yeah.
us because it just seems so superficial when
Yeah.
that way. So having that foundational information of the big three is true. So being double Scorpio, what I understand that means about me and what's that shown up in my life is that like the shadow aspects of Scorpio and all the things that we think about from a shadow perspective literally get flipped on their head with me
Mm.
being double Scorpio. And then my moon is in Virgo. And so
Mm.
those three together mean that my entire life is about bringing light to darkness and truth to secrets. And ultimately,
Yes.
that's what I'm all about. And in my
Yeah.
journey, in my personal life, that's been very true. And even in my professional life, for years before I became the healing mentor for almost 32 years, I did work that was about corporate investigations, if you will. So I was an auditor for
Hmm.
a long time. And then that's what I did was fraud and white collar crime investigations
Yeah.
for the last by 20 years of my career. So it all makes sense that I did that
Yeah.
professionally. I mean, it's literally written in my birth chart. That's what I would
Yep.
do professionally. And now what I do to help people to get down a healing journey and let go of the past, find their true authentic self,
Yeah.
and really to heal. That's
Yeah.
all what was written for me as part of my journey. And
Mm.
that foundational information of just those three aspects of my birth chart helped me to understand that very clearly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it does get very complex, though. The
Yeah.
layers that are there get super, super deep.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I'm not a student of it, you see, the way that you are, but I just take the information as it comes to me whenever I need,
Mhm.
let my astrologer, or co-star, you, whoever's going to talk to me in the moment to tell me what I need to hear. Yeah, it's really a great tool. So tell people how you work with them.
Mm. There's a couple different ways. So it's important to know I'm also an HR director. That's my day job, so to speak. I
Okay.
still work in the corporate world. So for me, at this time, my calling is to bridge the two worlds, work
Hmm.
and astrology, to bring these things together. So there's a number of ways that I do that. But one of the primary ways is I work with individuals. It does happen to be mostly women, but I have worked with a few men as well. And we read your chart. That's like the first thing we do is we look at your chart and we go, who are you meant to be? Who were you born to be? And then we talk about where is that showing up? Where is that not? And we talk about how do you want this to show up at work? And so it's helping people identify the core of their true self and then begin the process of bringing that into work and the rest of their lives. I think work is the hardest place to bring it in, aside from maybe if you're actively involved in church, that has its own challenges. But work is where are, we spend the bulk of our time for those of us who are still employees. And even for those who aren't, I work with a lot of people who have their own businesses as well. And it's how do you know your foundation? Or if we're talking about our life path, how do you know what your life path is? And then walk in integrity with that path is the questions that we're answering together. And we do it through looking at your birth chart. We do it through looking at what's coming for you in the year ahead through oracle cards, right there. We use these resources for that, but that's really what I do on the individual level. And then I actually also work with teams, which is so fun because when we talk about our sun, moon, and rising, each of the signs has its own ecology. I talked about Capricorn being that mountain peak. Scorpio is the depths of the ocean where you have volcanic lava coming up and forming an island, right? It is alchemical, it is transformative, but it is in the depths and the darkness. So each of our signs has its own energy, has its own ecology, and we put that together on teams to go, okay, if you have someone with really strong fire energy, they're going to be really good at getting things done. And then you've got somebody
Hmm.
with really strong water energy. They're going to need that emotional connection. So how do we make sure that both people have their needs met? How do we make sure that they are working well together so that the fire isn't being put out by the water and the fire's not turning the water into steam? We talk about the way that these
Hmm.
energies show up in teams and team dynamics, or ensuring that, if you're a new business owner and you're trying to build out your team, getting the right people on your team, getting the right mix of energies together. So it's a lot of there's a few different ways, but it all goes back to understanding who each of us are at our core, who our true self is, and then how do we live out as that person in integrity with our life path, in integrity with, we talk about the continuum of energies. You There's the shadow patterns and then there's the gift side of the energy. How do we work into the gift side of the energy?
So I've never heard anyone talk about using astrology in the workplace setting and for team dynamics, but it's
Yeah.
so logical, like the light
Yeah.
bulb's going on now that you're saying that. And I wonder because, and I'm sure you've taken these and maybe asked people to take them, but there's so many different personality type tests that are out there. And I've probably taken half a dozen of them over the
Yeah.
course of my professional career. And I can't tell you what any of them, I can't, for whatever reason, INTJ is in my head, but I think it's just because I heard somebody say that recently. I don't even know what it means or which one it comes from. I know I've taken that test and
Yeah.
I had my four, but I have no
Yeah.
idea. I just wonder if the people who created those tests, there has to be some unknown correlation. I'm assuming it's
Yeah.
unknown, some unknown correlation back to astrologically, right? Into your
Yeah.
zodiac, and there must be for it to
There
work because it
is.
does, but
And
nobody knows that or talks about it.
yeah. No, there
That's
is.
interesting.
I've dabbled with it. I haven't gone deep down that. I've thought about that previously, but the biggest difference that I see is all of those DISC, the Myers-Briggs, the strengths, the Clifton Strengths assessments. They're all great. I think that
Mhm.
I like no
Yeah,
diss on any
and
of
they
them.
work. I
They
think
are
they
all
work.
dependent on the way that we answer the questions and the way that we
Yeah,
perceive ourselves.
that's true.
Astrology
Yes.
begins with something outside of ourselves.
And it's interesting you say that because I had taken, and I'd have to go back and see which one it is, and I don't know that it really matters, but I took the same personality test at a company that I was with, my former employer, maybe 5 or 6, 7 years before I had my pivot point that I talked
Yeah.
about earlier, when my
Yeah.
that person I was died and the real me was now coming to
Yeah.
life. And I answered the questions based on that lens.
Yeah.
And at the time, I'm just answering the questions, and here are the results. Then about 2 years after I'd had that pivot point and I'd been 2 years into my deep healing journey, I took that same test again. And I know that I was answering those questions in a different way. And I said that, I
Yes.
was like, if you went back and looked at the one I did 10 years ago, I would come out in an entirely different place than where and that
Yep.
is exactly what you're saying. It's my
Yeah.
example of what you're saying because I
Yeah.
was answering at the time from
Yeah.
my filter, my perception, my lens, my life,
Yeah.
what I could see.
Yep.
And it was very different on both sides.
Yeah.
And astrology strips all of that away,
It does.
right?
I had the same experience because I took the
Yeah.
disc profile when I was married and still in that part of my life. And I took it again maybe 5 years after. And the whatever the four were very different, which speaks to we grow and we evolve as humans.
Yes,
That's part of our
that's
journey.
part of
So it
it.
would make
Yeah.
sense if we had the same profile 10 or 15 years apart. I would want to know, is that because you've grown deeper into those energies, or is that because you have been stagnant and not
Yeah.
changed?
Yeah.
And it could be either one of
Mhm.
those. But with astrology, it goes, okay, here is who you were born to be.
Mhm.
Now, let's do an assessment on how aligned you may be with that person right now versus not. And is it that you're just playing into more of those shadow patterns, or is it that you're truly completely out of alignment with your cosmic compass or your cosmic blueprint? And either of those could be true, especially as we're initiating or beginning or going through the healing journey. But it's the external starting point versus the, like we're talking about, okay, here's just who I am at the moment.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that too about being out of alignment with your cosmic print, right? Because can that happen, right? And if you go back to what we were talking about earlier about God saying this is who you're coming into this lifetime to be. This is what your
Yeah.
energy is here to do. And these are the resources, the tools, the strengths that I'm going to give you to
Yeah.
be able to accomplish your work in this lifetime. How can you be out of alignment with that? And for me, the way that I understand that is about my energy in this
Mm,
earth, connected to all of the other universal energy, your energy, and everyone else's energy. I'm still a human being who has a brain and I
yep.
can make choices that get me
Yes.
out of alignment. Right. And it's kind of people say you're not following God's will, or if I say I'm not following God's will, that's what we're saying. You're out of
Yeah.
line with your
Yeah.
cosmic blueprint, but that's
Yep.
coming from our humanness and the fact that our humanness is getting in the way of the fact that we're actually spiritual, energetic beings here on this planet with a particular purpose that we're
Yeah.
a mission that we're supposed to be undertaking. But as a
Yeah.
human, my brain can go, no, I'm going to go do this instead. And then we're
Yeah.
out of alignment, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah. That's
exactly.
right.
Yeah, that's right. So, all right. This has been a very fun conversation. It is one of
Yeah.
my absolute favorite topics because I think it's just so cool what I can learn about myself and what we can all know about ourselves, the
Yeah.
information that we can get if we go and seek it from someone who is good at what they do. And I do think that's important as
Hmm.
well, is to find
Yeah.
someone who is really a student and
Yes.
a professional in this space and is gifted. And I've met some astrologers who are not quite as gifted as others. I think that you are gifted.
Thank
So I'm
you.
very delighted to have you on the show today. And I hope that
Thank you.
people will connect with you and
Yeah.
explore it a little bit, right? There's nothing taboo about it. And
No.
it's actually very, as I said before, it gives me a peace and an understanding about me, what I'm
Yeah.
doing here,
Yeah.
why am I here, all of those questions broadly across my life,
Yeah.
but also situationally in the sort of the micro moments of my life. It helps me with that too. So I would like to invite people to explore that with you because it's very helpful in walking our life path.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate that so much and appreciate you. And you as a Scorpio with your natural question asking abilities
Yeah.
makes this conversation so fun because you ask such great questions.
Yeah, I just want to talk. That's
Yeah.
the other thing about me, though, when you're talking about the authenticity, and I don't like being like lurking in the shadows, and I'm here to bring light to darkness.
Yeah.
The way that shows up for me conversationally and in engaging in relationships with people is I say I'm not a news, weather, and sports kind of person. So, if I connect with you and we're connecting, we're probably going pretty deep,
I
fast.
love
And I
it.
can
That's
tell,
so
right? I mean,
Scorpio. Yeah,
right? And
it
if
is.
I'm,
It's
if like
let's
we're
go beneath
stuck,
this
yes,
immediately.
yes.
I don't do surface.
Yes, if I'm stuck in that news, weather, and sports space, I'm like, oh, this is just not working for me.
I love it.
Yeah,
Oh,
it served me well, but it's been helpful to understand that about
yeah.
myself, surviving my life through other roles that I was playing, and that was
Yep.
stifling my authenticity. And once I started to strip that off and learn that about myself, I'm like, oh, I get it. And it's fun, right? I like having the deep conversations with people, and I'm a safe place to do that. So
Yes.
it serves me well in the work that I do. All right, so we will connect the different ways that people can find you into the show notes.
Okay.
But would you just quickly give a couple places where people can
Yeah.
find you and they can hear you saying it without looking at the show notes?
Sure. For anyone who is interested in finding their sun, moon, and rising sign, I've created a PDF guide that you can get. It's mosttrueyou.com/guide. And it's literally a step-by-step guide of how do you get your chart? How do you see where your sun, your moon, and your rising sign are? And then what do those mean in very practical terms? We talk about astrology. I like to say astrology is complex, but it does not have to be complicated. And
Hmm.
so this is a kind of beginner's guide to knowing what your sun, moon, and rising sign are and what they mean. So anyone who's interested in that, it's just mosttrueyou.com/guide. The other is email for those who have questions. Always happy to field questions via email. It's hello@mosttrueyou.com. And then I'm really not big on social media. So I have an Instagram account. It's probably been a year since I have posted, but if someone wants to DM me
Okay.
via Instagram, it's most true you.
Yeah, and that's okay. So
Yeah.
I'm
And
suddenly not a fan of social media and
yeah,
Instagram,
it's
all
not
that
for
anymore
me.
either.
And I do, especially for people who are listening and going, okay, but I have questions. I do offer, if you email me, I'm happy to send you a link, book time on my calendar. We can chat as well. So
Yeah.
email is really and truly the best way. I read those, I respond to those. And then for people who just want like okay, let me get my hands on something, that guide, themosttrueyou.com/guide is the way to go.
I'm going to go get the guide because
Okay.
I'm interested in it because
Yay.
I like the different interpretations of
Yeah.
my chart because I hear things in different ways depending on who it is that's providing it. So I am going to go and get that. But I do think
Okay.
that the way you invite people to connect with you through email or
Mhm.
to connect directly is really important because it's one
Yeah.
thing to have it in a form that's impersonal, but
Yeah.
it's so much richer, as I've
Yes.
already said, when you're building a relationship and you're interacting with someone who can help you to look at some of the more subtleties of your chart to help
Yes.
explain more about who you are and why you're here. So I love
Yeah.
it that you invite people to do that
Thanks.
rather than trying to get the quick fix off of social media or whatever it
Yeah.
may be. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. So I love
Thanks.
that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's part of my design.
Yeah. Yes. And you are staying very true to it. So thank you very much for doing that. Yeah.
Oh,
All right, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and I hope that we have helped to debunk some myths and taboos about what astrology actually is. And I really hope that this episode will inspire you to go and explore it and understand what your life path is written in the stars. I hope you have enjoyed today's episode of Let's Heal with Beth Jones. If you did, please subscribe to my YouTube channel at BethJonesHEALingMentor. And if you'd like to know more about me and my work to help other survivors to heal, please visit me on the web at empoweredsurvivors.com.